The Big Three. Throughout NBA history, this term has been used pretty ambiguously with all types of three-man tandems. But one thing we can agree with is that whenever that term is thrown out, there are certain expectations that come with becoming a Big Three, whether you like it or not. Whether it's the Big Three of Miami that was promised to win 7 championships, or a Big Three in OKC that tried one final ditch effort to win a championship by adding another all-star to your team. Either way you look at it, those two teams have championship aspirations in their mind. But what about the Big Threes that never worked out? What about the Big Threes that were created but in the grand scheme of things failed for one reason or another? Well, it's time to take a look back at memory road with another tier list video with the failed NBA Big Three tier list, where we will look at 10 examples of failed brought together Big Threes, compare and contrast their times together as a trio, and just see who out of these 10 are the worst of the worst. But as usual, we got to set some parameters on what makes one trio better or worse than the other. And those 3 categories will be, of course, living up to expectations with forming of this trio, the future ramifications of forming this trio, and of course, lastly, and this will be the controversial part, was it even worth it in retrospect? And as usual, this video will be a long one, so strap in, grab a nice snack, and enjoy. And consider becoming a member of the channel to see these videos early, along with other perks. You already know who it is. Roll it!
3, 2, 1.
Weights in the weight room, so he stitched up in the left. He can do it all.
It's over, ladies and gentlemen.
But before we start, did you know that identity theft is committed every 14 seconds and is currently the fastest growing crime in America as we move on to the digital age? Well, if you don't want to be a victim of that, let me introduce you to today's video sponsor in Aura, the jersey sponsor of the Minnesota Timberwolves, and your ticket to having a safe experience online with its built-in use of identity theft protection, fraud monitoring, a VPN, password manager, and antivirus software, all combined into one easy-to-use app. With Aura, it'll monitor the dark web for your emails, passwords, and social security numbers, and sends alerts fast right to your phone or email address. And it'll also give you near real-time alerts on suspicious credit inquiries, like if someone was trying to open a loan or a credit card in your name. All of this, again, in one simple and convenient app that you can use today if you use my affiliate link in the description or comment section below, where if you do, you'll be able to try it out for 14 days for free and protect yourself from America's fastest growing crime. Thank you again to Aura for sponsoring today's video, and let's get right into it. Now, to start off this tier list, let's start off with the team I made an example of in the beginning of this video of a failed Big Three. And that'll be the tandem of Russell Westbrook, Paul George, and Carmelo Anthony. Before the making of this trio was made a year ago, it was just Russell Westbrook all by himself in the 2016-17 season, where he would go on and average the first triple-double in an NBA season since Oscar Robertson, earned his first ever MVP trophy, and was the scoring champion of the season. And of course, garnered the biggest usage rate ever in NBA history at 41.65%. But obviously, as they lost to the runner-up of the MVP trophy, James Harden, and the Houston Rockets in the playoffs, Sam Presti and Thunder management had to find a way to maximize on this, as Russell Westbrook was trying to soul the NBA all by himself was a pipe dream and far from obtainable. So comes the first move that we made towards the status of this Big Three, where on July 6, 2017, the Thunder traded young pieces in Victor Oladipo and Domantas Sabonis for Paul George to match up Russell Westbrook and PG, and also get him to stay in OKC in the first place, as he was also in contract talks at the same time. But as one final nail in the coffin to try to get Russ back in OKC, Sam Presti decided to make a Big Three instead of a duo with him and Paul George by trading Enes Kanter, Doug McDermott, and a 2018 second round pick for Carmelo Anthony on September 25th, 2017. And with that move, Russell Westbrook signed back to the OKC Thunder only 4 days after the Carmelo Anthony trade. But with this summer of suspense ending, the Thunder had now created their own Big Three with MVP winner Russell Westbrook, Paul George, who was getting back into his former self in Indiana, and Carmelo Anthony, who was probably just more glad to be competing for another championship and out of New York City. But with this tandem of stars on the team came immediate questions, as the Thunder faced problems after problem problem after problem in that season, whether it came from Russell Westbrook still owning the second highest usage rate in the NBA, the Thunder having a bottom 3 bench scoring offense, Carmelo Anthony being a negative in the starting lineup statistically, and I'm, sure that I don't need to play the clip of him about his thoughts on being off the bench, correct? Despite that, their record of 48-34, a literal 1-game improvement from the year before when it was just Russ versus the world, the Thunder still had a lot of optimism everywhere when it came to winning something together, especially as they were set to face the Utah Jazz, who at the same time was led by a rookie, Donovan Mitchell. And people thought that the star power, which was pretty important in the playoffs, was going to curb stomp over the Utah Jazz, who was still healing from the departure of Gordon Hayward in free agency. But as we all know, that went the complete opposite way that people expected, as Donovan Mitchell gave us a glimpse of how he would be in the future, averaging 28 points per game in that series. While for the OKC Thunder, each of the trio had their own blunders in the series. Russell Westbrook didn't reach 40% shooting in that series, and during the 3 straight loss gauntlet only averaged 18 points a game through games 2 and 4, and Paul George, who was probably the less egregious out of the 3, had more turnovers than assists, and absolutely got shut down in games 2 and 6 with 18 points and 6 points respectively. And for Carmelo Anthony, he literally just proved to everyone in that series why him coming off the bench was for the best of the team, as he only averaged 11 points the entire series and shot horribly from 3. Altogether, this makeshift big 3 came together and fared horribly in their first time in the playoffs together, and it would be the only time they would ever fail in the playoffs, as it took only 1 season for Sam Presti to notice his mistake, as he traded Carmelo to the Hawks for Dennis Schroeder to be their actual 6th man. But let's get to talking about this team in retrospect. The main reason this team was put together was due to the looming decision of Russ possibly leaving OKC, which caused Sam Presti to make some moves that he possibly didn't want to make do. But he was able to trade for Paul George, but in a possible desperation move, he also got Carmelo Anthony. For that, he gave up 2 people, ended up being all-stars, and Victor Oladipo, who came one as soon as he left OKC and got his own team, and Domantas Sabonis, who was being used the wrong way in OKC as more of a stretch big, who also became a lot better as soon as he left OKC. And in the Melo trade, he really gave up valuable bench pieces in Doug McDermott and Enes Kanter, and a 2nd-round pick returned into Mitchell Robinson. It'd be safe to say Victor and Domantas Sabonis wouldn't be what they are now, or at least after they left, due to Russell Westbrook owning one of the highest usage rates in NBA history, so I can excuse the Paul George trade for the most part. But in all honesty, I think it should have ended there when it came to them two just being a duo, rather than adding Carmelo to be a trio. Adding another big ego in Melo for people who are only going to add more depth to the team only hurts you when you see how he acted and how little he produced in the starting lineup. All in all, I find this trio to be one of the more harmless in this video so far. Yes, the Thunder failed to make anything happen with this trio, and they continue to fail even with the duo. But as we all know, they bounced back very well, trading away PG for their current all-star and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and other draft assets, and trading Russell Westbrook for CP3, and then trading CP3 for even more draft capital. So I will settle with a C on the tier list for this team. This team absolutely embarrassed themselves in the playoffs and had all the problems written over them for the entire season, and even traded away future all-stars in the process. But the way they recovered from that 2-year mistake gives them a few positives in my mind for how things turned out. For our next big 3 to discuss about, we have to talk about what is possibly the weirdest big 3 of this video. The Chicago Bulls trio of Dwyane Wade, Rajon Rondo, and Jimmy Butler. I already know what some of y'all are saying. How is this team possibly a big 3? Well, apparently a lot of publications online and major news outlets hailed this trio as a big 3, with D-Wade's reunion to his hometown team, and Rajon Rondo still being one of the best floor general point guards in the NBA after his carousel of teams he's been on up until that point, with controversy following him everywhere. But if there's one coach who would potentially be able to handle this loose cannon, it's Fred Hoiberg, which he wasn't able to do anyway, so yeah. This team, before the signing of D-Wade to a 2-year $47 million deal at 35 and Rajon Rondo to a 2-year $28 million deal, the Bulls were 1 year removed from Tom Thibodeau's leave, Pau Gasol leaving for the San Antonio Spurs, and of course, Joakim Noah and D Rose leaving for the Knicks. And after all of that, it left Jimmy Butler on his own on the Bulls. So with that, the Bulls are still wanting to try to contend, with Jimmy Butler signing an extended deal with the Bulls in the 2015-16 offseason. And it was now or never when it came to trying to win something with him. So in a move of what I can only call desperation, the Bulls management decided to sign D-Wade for a Chicago reunion as he's from the place, while giving him way too much money for his age and ability level, and also signing Rajon Rondo. But one of the major questions about this big 3 was, how was it going to work together? You have point guard Rondo, shooting guard D-Wade, and and small forward Jimmy Butler, which they started their season off with that lineup. But as soon into the season where they were barely over 500, Fred Hoiberg decided to bench Rondo for Michael Carter Williams. You can see how badly this is going to go. And then with Michael Carter Williams getting injured, he then replaced him with Jerry Grant, who at that point was in his second year of NBA play. But according to online sources, people claimed he did this to try to find a lineup that could produce wins, and they honestly always hovered barely over 500 as a team. And with them never finding the right system to find wins consistently as a trio, the three of the players were always at each other's necks all season, and it was definitely always in the media sphere, just documenting every single one of it. Especially after a loss to Atlanta where D-Wade and Jimmy Butler had a spat, they ended with them wondering about each other's devotion to the team. D-Wade was quoted to say, "I don't know if they care enough, so I can't say it is. I wish I could say that everyone in here is going to go home and not eat tonight. I can't say that. I wish I could, but I don't know if they care enough." And even Rondo was displeased with how they both went to the media over their troubles rather than figuring it out as a team. This team was truly hailed with three separate big egos in one locker room, and it was doomed for failure. Overall, Jimmy Butler almost led the entire NBA in minutes played. D-Wade averaged a career-low 18 points a game since his rookie season. Rajon Rondo only played 42 of his 69 games available as a starter. But even with this dysfunctional team, they still managed to get the 8th seed, where they played the Celtics with Isaiah Thomas and almost beat them, having a 2-0 lead at one point until an eventual injury came to Rajon Rondo, who was averaging a near triple-double, which then turned into a reverse sweep where the Celtics won. Now overall here, let's be real with ourselves, this team was doomed from the start. You have to be very careful when it comes to putting three separate big egos together, especially if they're not friends with each other off the court. And due to management jumping the gun, they basically had another season of pain after all the pieces left for greener pastures. I'd be more lenient considering no one was really considering this team to be a championship contender, but the makeup of this team just makes this team a bottom tier team in the first place. Easy F tier for sure, but I guess you can argue a D tier since they turned Jimmy Butler into Zach LaVine and Lauri Markkanen. But more on that one to come. Next on the tier list, we have another shot in the dark big three creation in the Brooklyn Nets with Deron Williams, Brook Lopez, and ISO Joe Johnson. Before the creation of this trio in the 2010-11 season, the Nets brought in their first piece in Deron Williams, who was having troubles with his coach in the Utah Jazz, Jerry Sloan, and the whole franchise in general, really. Got his trade he asked for in exchange for Derek Favors, Devin Harris, and 2 first-round picks. But as Deron Williams was balling out in New Jersey in the 2011-12 season, they moved to Brooklyn for the next season with another big move that was waiting to happen in the summer, with the Nets trading more assets in Jordan Farmar, Anthony Morrow, Johan Petro, Deshaun Stevenson, and Jordan Williams, and an unprotected future first-round pick and 2 future second-round picks for Joe Johnson to create a new big three in the Eastern Conference to compete with the Kings of the East, the Miami Heat. With this big three, you had 3 all-star level players playing together on one team with a bunch of veteran talent around them. But in their first season together, things never certainly took off. None of the 3 players eclipsed 20 points per game, and they started off 500 with a 14-14 record with then coach Avery Johnson until he was fired for PJ Carlesimo, who ended off their season way better with a 39-14 record, where in that span, Deron Williams and Brook Lopez improved together, averaging 20 points a game with then coach Carlesimo, while Joe Johnson took the backseat, averaging 15 a game. But now with that season over and done with, Brook Lopez became an all-star, and the Nets ended their season with a 49-33 record, which was their best record since the 05-06 season. But that's where all the fun ends, as they end up losing to the Chicago Bulls in the playoffs in a 4-5 matchup, but losing in 7 games off the hands of Jimmy Butler and Marco Bellinelli, both scoring 24 points apiece, while the big 2 pieces of the big three in Deron Williams and Brook Lopez combined for 45 points, while Joe Johnson shot 2 of 14 in that series clinching game. The Nets were out of the playoffs, but now you can imagine this season was a nice stepping stone for the team to go on and improve together and actually end up winning games, or just continuing more into the playoffs next season. They ended the games only 5 games out of the second seed and still had some good years of their core left. But as we all know, the building of this trio wouldn't happen, as the Nets management decided to jump the gun once again by committing one of the worst trades in NBA history by trading away many assets and 4 unprotected first-round picks for the services of Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce, and Jason Terry, oh my lord, which now turned this big three with potential promise into what basically became a super team. Not a super duper team, but considering the talent around them, you can imagine that's what people thought. But enough of that. With this team and a new coach in Jason Kidd, things slowly took a turn for the worse. The Nets had a bottom 10 offense despite all the scoring talent around the team. Brook Lopez sustained a season-ending injury to his foot, and the pecking order was never established on the team of who was going to be the top dog. So things became very dysfunctional. And due to that, they ended up getting a worse record than the year before with a 44-38 record. But at least they passed their first round test against the Raptors in 7 games, but ended up getting completely routed by the team that they were destined to be able to beat with the creation of the Nets and that trade that happened in that summer to defeat the Miami Heat in 5 games. And with another season of disappointment as they went 38-44 due to missing Brook Lopez, ends the Big Three saga as Deron Williams signs with the Dallas Mavericks in that offseason. But let's talk about it. The creation of this Big Three was simple enough. They got a disgruntled star in Deron Williams via trade and got a perennial all-star scorer in Joe Johnson from Atlanta to match with Brook Lopez. They had the stepping stones to at least try and compete in the East, but due to the blunder of the trade that was made and the injury to Brook Lopez, everything broke down in only 3 seasons together. And when you consider the fact that they traded away necessary draft capital that would have really helped them if things did fall apart, which it did, it could have potentially given you the best two-way duo in today's NBA in Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. Yeah, this one deserves, again, one of the worst in the F tier. We can all agree that this trio would have probably been forgotten in time if it wasn't for that trade, especially since they would have been better off not making this trade in the first place. But call it some extra salt in the wound for how terribly Billy King ran this team into the ground. From one Nets trio to another, now we have to talk about what was hyped to be one of, if not the best trio we have ever seen in NBA history, in the trio of Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, and mid-season acquisition James Harden. Before this trio was created, the Brooklyn Nets were 1 year removed from the Kyrie, KD, and DeAndre Jordan acquisitions, and were waiting for KD to come back from his Achilles injury from his time with the Warriors. And with this team going 35-37 that season, they was really awaiting his return. But off that season, you'd expect the Nets to simply run it back and hope they're healthy this time around. But as the Nets started off the season 7-6, they pulled the trigger, getting the disgruntled James Harden out of Houston for pieces in Jared Allen, Taurean Prince, Karis LeVert, and a bunch of draft capital for James Harden. Now, with this trio having 2 guys that were MVP winners, all 3 of these guys who are all NBA level talent, you'd expect them to be an absolute menace of a team offensively in the NBA. And that is exactly what happened. And there are plenty of things to talk about when it came to just how powerful this team was together. The Brooklyn Nets own 3 players who scored 24 points a game or more in that time frame. They own the best offensive rating by far, but post James Harden trade, they were also one of the worst defensive rating teams in possibly NBA history. And as you can see by some of the weird battles they had against other teams, like their 149-146 loss to the Wizards and their 145-141 win against the Hawks. Both games in regulation, by the way, but that was their only weakness, but also their biggest strength. Just because there weren't too many teams who could realistically outscore that trio. But at the same time, this season could have gone 10 times better for them if it weren't for the constant injuries from the trio. The newly acquired James Harden only played 36 games for the Nets, KD only played 35, and Kyrie Irving played the most at 54. But the factor was truly impacting this team was the injury to Kyrie Irving in Game 4 versus the Bucks, and James Harden being injured in Game 1 versus the Bucks. But just like how the Warriors with KD and Boogie only went down to the injuries in the finals versus the Raptors, the same thing could be said about this Big Three in Brooklyn going down in 7 versus the eventual champions in the Milwaukee Bucks. But depending who you're talking to, if it wasn't for injuries, the Nets could have taken it all the way very easily, especially consider who they was going against in the conference finals and the Hawks and the Phoenix Suns. And honestly, I couldn't agree more. But going into this next year, people all believed that if this team simply stayed together with a minimum of injuries, it was going to be really hard to take them out the playoffs at full strength. But as we all know, this season for the Nets was full of controversy from every angle. Kyrie Irving choosing to sit out the first half of the season and then only playing home games later in the season, and KD was forced to lead the team on his own with Harden, and then Harden not exactly being enthused with Kyrie Irving's actions when he was then traded for Ben Simmons, Andre Drummond, and Seth Curry on February 10, 2022, which ends the very short Big Three stint. Now, when it comes to ranking this Big Three on this tier list, I'm in the same realm as everybody else. If this team was to stick together simply for 1 or 2 seasons, a championship would have been very easily won, as the Eastern Conference was a little less established when it came to top teams. Unfortunately, this team was created during a pandemic, which caused Kyrie Irving to not want to play that year, which also created the very early breaking up of this trio. In a perfect world, or at least in a non-pandemic setting with minimal injuries, this Big Three would have certainly been champions, but that's just life, unfortunately. Also, considering how they are playing now with new coach Jacques Vaughn, I am sure they don't regret this move at all, getting Ben Simmons. But with all that said, I will give them an A tier at the top. But in a normal NBA season, they wouldn't even be on this tier list in the first place to begin with. But a failed Big Three is a failed Big Three. But they were that close to winning a championship ring that year, literally a shoe size away. Shout out Kevin Durant. Next on the tier list, we have to talk about the Big Three that stayed together the longest in this video in the Los Angeles Clippers, with Blake Griffin, DeAndre Jordan, and Chris Paul. This trio together combined for 12 All-NBA appearances, 12 All-Star appearances, and multiple considerations for the MVP award. But as we all know, throughout the 6 years this trio has been together, they've never reached the conference finals, blew multiple playoff leads in embarrassing fashion, and had constant injuries to their stars over that time. But this trio was started in the 2011-12 season, where the Clippers traded Al-Farouq Aminu, Eric Gordon, Chris Kaman, and a 2012 first-round pick to obtain Chris Paul. On this team, he would join a second-year Blake Griffin off a Rookie of the Year campaign and a bunch of young, hungry players looking to improve and win. But as the Clippers improved, they found a nice piece on their team in DeAndre Jordan, who became one of the best premier shot blockers, rebounders, and dunkers in the NBA, leading the NBA in field goal percentage 5 years in a row. But with another move made in receiving Doc Rivers via trade, a rarity when it comes to coaches, this team truly took off. However, at this time also starts the perennial failures in the NBA playoffs. Starting off in the 2013-14 season, Doc Rivers' first year in LA, they earned a franchise best 57 wins, with Blake Griffin receiving All-NBA honors and Chris Paul with All-NBA and All-Star appearance honors himself for the 2, and of course being the 3rd seed in the Wild West. However, with this season of dreams completed, they go to a 7-game slugfest with the Golden State Warriors, but ended up losing in the second round against the OKC Thunder in 6, with the viral moment of CP3 turning over the ball to Russell Westbrook in Game 1, and also fouling him on a 3-point attempt late in that same game. The next year, the Clippers put up very similar record numbers, only 1 game worse than last year, with more All-Star appearances and All-NBA appearances from CP3, Blake Griffin, and DeAndre Jordan. And as we all know, in that same season, they gave us one of the best finishes in the NBA playoff series ever versus the Spurs. They ended on a very clutch game winner from Chris Paul over Tim Duncan. However, as they went into their next series versus the Houston Rockets, they looked to be the series favorites and proved that way with a comfortable 3-1 lead. And with the Houston Rockets back against the wall in Game 6, they ended up giving up a 40-15 fourth quarter, with Corey Brewer scoring 15 of those points, and then finally in Game 7 with the nail in the coffin being there, ending their run that season. Moving on to the 2015-16 season, you once again had a very similar season record-wise and accolades-wise. 53-29 record, and Blake Griffin and CP3 being all NBA honors, and a nice 4th seeding place, which gave them the matchup against the Portland Trail Blazers, which again, they had a 2-0 lead. However, due to injuries to CP3 and Blake, ended with a reverse sweep for the Blazers to end another year of Clippers basketball. And finally, in the 2016-17 season, with again, similar success, but with more writing on the wall, as Blake Griffin and CP3 would miss 21 games apiece together, which again, would give them a 50-win season despite all of that. But just like I said, with the constant trend of how things ended up for the Clippers, people possibly expected a similar occurrence, and again, no one was surprised. Against the Utah Jazz, like clockwork, with the series tied 1-1, Blake Griffin would go out with only 18 minutes of play, and with a major piece of the puzzle gone in that series, the Clippers would fall in 7 games. And with CP3 to the Houston Rockets trade happening on June 28, 2017, ends the tenure of the Big Three of the Los Angeles Clippers. Now, as a review, this team was routinely always considered as finals bound and contenders, but either lost in the most embarrassing way possible, blowing leads or having terrible clutch moments, or injuries got in their way routinely. routinely year after year after year. But with the fact that they never reached the conference finals, I find it appropriate to give them a D tier. They absolutely did what they were supposed to do in the regular season, never ever going under expectations, but when it came to competing in the playoffs, that's when everything falls apart. But at least they can say they somewhat bounced back from that era with another duo in Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, but even with that in itself, it's not exactly going as people would expect it to, and this is coming from a Clippers fan. We talked about a Jimmy Butler ran team earlier in this video, but I think it's time to talk about another Jimmy Butler ran team. The team that he was traded to after his time with the Bulls in the Minnesota Timberwolves with himself, Andrew Wiggins, and Karl Anthony Towns. Like I said earlier, he was traded in the summer of the 2017 season for Lauri Markkanen, Chris Dunn, and Zach Lavine. But before this trade was done, the Timberwolves were trying to go into a new age with a new coach in Tom Thibodeau, bringing in a more hardcore and hard-nosed style of basketball than they were usually used to. But the Timberwolves are trying to compete now rather than wait for the trio of Zach Lavine, Andrew Wiggins, and Cat to improve together, as we know for that trend to be more commonplace nowadays. With this trade, the Timberwolves garnered themselves a top shooting guard candidate in the NBA, a team leader who can and will carry his team to victories if needed, and finally put the Timberwolves in the playoff picture for the first time since the Kevin Garnett days. And with Jimmy Butler only being 28, he still had plenty of time to improve with Cat and Wiggins as they go into their primes themselves. However, this trio really never worked out, and the blame was pointed right at the young duo of Andrew Wiggins and Karl Anthony Towns. It is safe to say that every player or athlete needs to be treated a certain way to really get the best out of them. But when it comes to Tom Thibodeau and Jimmy Butler's way of getting things done, it did not resonate with the young players well at all. Even to the point to where Jimmy Butler led the third stringers against the first string starters and won against them. But even with all the drama surrounding the T-Wolves daily, the Timberwolves weirdly enough had one of the best offensive ratings in the NBA, however had one of the worst offensive ratings in the NBA, an area of expertise for Tom Thibodeau and is known to make teams improve on. But even with this interesting team, the Timberwolves had a record of 47-35, and Jimmy Butler and Karl Anthony Towns scoring over 20 points a game, while Andrew Wiggins regressed a little bit in his third man role. But now comes the first real test as a trio, as the 8th seed in the Western Conference going against the Houston Rockets, who had James Harden and Chris Paul. But despite the clear difference in talent, people still had a sliver of hope for the Timberwolves that could make a little bit of noise against the Rockets. But that was soon silenced as James Harden scored 44 points in the first game of the series and ended it in a very clear 5-game gentleman sweep, with a lot of criticism coming at the way of the Timberwolves as the big three of that team all averaged 15 points a night in their first and only playoff series together, where the worst of the criticism was coming at the way of Karl Anthony Towns for his play against Clint Capella and shooting 26% from 3 in that series. But with that series done, Jimmy Butler's point was proven about how Cat and Wiggins didn't want to be better just like him. So he requested a trade from the Timberwolves, where he was traded for a chump change and Robert Covington, Dario Saric, Jerry Bayless, and 2 future second-round picks to the Philadelphia 76ers. When it comes to retrospect about this team, the Jimmy Butler trade was rather unnecessary, at least in my opinion, as it showed how quickly the franchise was trying to make a move happen towards their success rather now than later, and to let this trio not grow together. Due to that, they gave up Zach Lavine, who grew into an all-star, a nice rookie in Lauri Markkanen, and then ended up setting them back a few years further because of the trade. The Timberwolves acted in haste and reaped the consequences due to it, and it wouldn't be fixed until years later. So I think it's safe to say this trio deserves a D tier for just how badly this 1 year went, the people giving up in the process to make this move happen, and of course, the setback it cost the Timberwolves for them acting in haste. We've already seen a major mistake happen from the side of the Chicago Bulls, matching up their star in Jimmy Butler with players in Rajon, Rondo, and Dwyane Wade. But years later, they've done something very similar and jumped the gun too soon, putting them in the exact same place at the same time. Let's look at another botched big three, at least currently, with the Chicago Bulls with Zach Lavine, DeMar DeRozan, and Nikola Vucevic. Before this trio was created, Zach Lavine was a newly traded player for the Bulls, continuing to become one of the better scorers in the NBA in the 2019-20 season. But with players like Wendell Carter Jr. and Lauri Markkanen not exactly performing at their best under Coach Billy Donovan a year later, and with new executives and GMs coming into the franchise, whose name I won't even dare to try to pronounce, to bring up basketball back in Chicago, decided to make his first year as a GM one with immediate progress. So on March 25th, 2021, the Chicago Bulls made a move that would improve their team trajectory immediately by trading for Nikola Vucevic, a then two-time All-Star who just came off an All-Star campaign with the Magic, averaging 24 points, 12 rebounds, and 4 assists a game. However, traded him for Wendell Carter Jr., who never found his footing with the Bulls, Otto Porter Jr., and 2 straight years of first-round picks. To some, this is a very risky move as Nikola was doing this on a team with no identity, but at the same time, the numbers he was putting up was way too appealing to not notice for other GMs around who wanted to make a similar move, especially when you consider that he was an immediate upgrade to the center position for the Bulls. With that move made, Nikola was the premier player for the Bulls, averaging very similar numbers to what he was putting up in Orlando, and helped the Bulls finish their season 11-17, which was an improvement in their own right as he brought more to the team than Wendell did immediately. But unfortunately, with them still going 31-41 to end the season, they lost their first round pick to the Magic that turned into Franz Wagner for the Magic, as it was a top 4 protected pick, and that pick landed at the A spot. But no worries, as the Bulls on August 11, 2021 traded Al-Farouq Aminu, Thaddeus Young, and multiple picks for the services of DeMar DeRozan of the San Antonio Spurs. With that trade, the Bulls created a big 3 of all-stars, all traded from separate teams. Zach Lavine, who was just top 10 in scoring in the NBA, Nikola Vucevic, who was averaging a career high in points for the Magic, and DeMar DeRozan ready to compete for a championship like he did for the Raptors. And as we all know, the Bulls competed greatly in the Eastern Conference, where at one point they was the first seed in the East, but as injuries stacked up all around them with Patrick Williams, Lonzo Ball, and Alex Caruso out for a considerable amount of time, they started to shift back all the way down to the 6th seed. But what this season gave DeMar DeRozan being an all-star and one of the top scorers in the NBA, Zach Lavine doing the same and staying consistent, Nikola Vucevic trying to get used to being a third option. But with their depleted team, they ended up being very quickly taken out in the playoffs in 5 games to the Milwaukee Bucks. However, as they go into this current season, their problems become to look a lot more evident. The year before, the Bulls are rated as a bottom 10 defensive team and a near bottom half offensive team. And that wasn't on the fault of the big 3, no. That was a team composition problem. But you can also blame the injuries for that too, as Lonzo Ball only played 35 games for the Bulls so far. But going into this season at the halfway point and at the recording of this video, it is starting to look a tad worse than even last year. Right now at 19-23, the 10th seed in the Eastern Conference is still having the same problems as last year, but worse, owning a bottom 10 bench scoring offense and again a bottom 10 defense. This Chicago Bulls trio will be doomed to fail, but not at the fault of the trio each having good seasons in their own right, but due to the factors that they can't control. Would they be able to compete against the top teams in the East like the 76ers, Bucks, Celtics, Cavs, and Nets in the Eastern Conference? Probably not. But with their team riddled with injuries constantly, we'll never even see them get a fair shot. Due to that, I'll give them a C tier ranking on this tier list. I have to ask if people believe they would even defy the odds and beat some of these teams with better coordinated rosters and with far better superstars. But I will give the Chicago Bulls credit for trying something and not entirely losing out on it. But I am sure Chicago fans are hurting from not having those picks if things do break down, which would place them down further on this list if that was the case, or if this video was ever discussed in the future again. And once again, we go from one Jimmy Butler-led team to another team, and now his third stop in Philadelphia, where he formed an amazing-looking team on paper with himself, Ben Simmons, and Joel Embiid. And then when you add Tobias Harris and also JJ Redick, who was averaging a career high on that team, this team had the absolute making of a dynasty if able to keep it together. But before the fact, we had the 76ers team, who was one of the best defensive teams in the NBA, but had their struggles offensively, especially in the playoffs, and they showed that to be true, as this 76ers team lost 3 very close games to the Boston Celtics in the playoffs. But going into that summer, changes needed to be made, slowly but surely. But in this case, everything happened so quickly that changed the expectations of this team drastically. Very early into the 2018-19 NBA season, the 76ers traded Robert Covington, Dario Saric, and a 2022 second-round pick to the Timberwolves for Jimmy Butler, which officially gave the 76ers, again, a top shooting guard candidate in the NBA. And then when you add Tobias Harris being traded there later, it only strengthens the case of this team being finals contenders even more. In this season, Jimmy Butler gave the 76ers 18 points a game, a great team leader, and and a player who will do anything to win a game, even making game winners for the 76ers twice that season. His presence on the 76ers was a well-needed factor that Philadelphia needed to level up and take things to the next level. And with Embiid averaging the most points in his career at that point, it once again brought up the case of them being championship favorites in the East as they held the 3rd seed in the Eastern Conference standing wise. However, many gains back from the 2nd and 1st team Raptors and Bucks. But in the playoffs, they made very easy work of the Brooklyn Nets, but had their first real playoff test against the eventual champions Toronto Raptors. In that series, however, it mainly proved the 76ers were in fact not ready to compete on the biggest stage despite the 7-game series, of course. Joel Embiid struggled greatly against the Raptors, averaging only 17 points in that series a game on 37% from the field and 33% from 3, and only scoring over 20 points twice. But the leader of that series came from the newly traded Jimmy Butler, who was battle tested already, averaging 22 points a game and had multiple great performances against the Raptors. But as we all know, it came down to that one shot in Game 7 of the Eastern Conference second round that sealed this series from a Kawhi Leonard shot in the corner. But with that shot ending the 76ers season, optimism was still there for 76ers fans everywhere. But that was only, and if only, someone like a Jimmy Butler could stick around, as Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid will only improve and Jimmy's leadership could bring them a championship, similar to how he almost did it with the Heat a couple years ago with their young players in Bam Adebayo and Tyler Hero. But controversy ensued as reports came out that Jimmy Butler and Brett Brown didn't have the best connection as a player and coach, reportedly being mad at the front office for their discussion of how they couldn't control Jimmy Butler, as people thought of him as a loose cannon and potentially a locker room cancer. So instead, via a sign and trade, he left for the Miami Heat, where he'd be playing with a great and established culture, and even took the team to the finals on his own back. But when it comes down to reviewing this big three, it truly comes down to a what-if scenario. This team was truly one of the biggest what-if big threes in NBA history, as this big three could have been one of the better ones in its current NBA era. Jimmy's leadership and drive for success would have turned into something like he did in Miami, with better players than Philly and Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons. But unfortunately, due to the front office and the coach especially, he left for greener pastures. Even though this big three failed, I would give them a B tier. They was one shot away from competing in overtime to go to the conference finals against a beatable Bucks team and going to the NBA finals against an already rattled Warriors team who had health concerns at all angles. In an alternate universe, I would love to see these three work out, but we can only remember the good times they had that didn't even last a full calendar year. Now we go into the inspiration of this video, one of the biggest what-if successful big threes in NBA history, with the LA Lakers with Kobe Bryant, Pau Gasol, and Dwight Howard. Before this big three was created, the Lakers were still competing for an NBA championship, but slowly regressing as a team, going 41-25 after going 57-25 the year before. And with them losing to the young OKC Thunder, who went on to represent the West in the finals, and with Kobe Bryant only getting older, it was time for an upgrade to the purple and gold. And that's where the Lakers saw their opportunity with the disgruntled superstar and Dwight Howard, who wanted out of Orlando. And on August 10, 2012, in a giant 14 trade, they received Dwight Howard while only giving up Andrew Bynum, who just came off an all-star campaign, and a few role players with a draft pick. Now this team had Kobe Bryant, who was still balling despite his older age, Pau Gasol, who was still a top big man, and Dwight Howard, which created one of the best front courts, if not the best front court in the NBA. And with Steve Nash added to this team, you could argue this was a super team waiting to take over the NBA. But as we all know, that would not be the case by a long shot, and not by their own fault, depending who you talk to. First, the Lakers had the injury bug all season. Pau Gasol only lasted 49 games, and Steve Nash only lasted 50. And when it comes down to the team in general, the Lakers had problems with coaching as they went through 3 separate coaching stints, also coming with their own separate coaching strategies. With the first coach in Mike Brown, he wanted to have the offense be based off the Princeton offense that Kobe was not exactly the biggest fan of, but stayed patient and trusted the fact. But then came in Coach Bernie Bickerstaff after Mike Brown got fired, who went 5-1 with the team, and after he got laid off, it was finally Mike D'Antoni's turn, who was hired mid-season, to come in with a new plan. But unfortunately, the system never really worked out, as Pau Gasol and Dwight Howard especially were not exactly the biggest fans of Mike D'Antoni's system. And finally, the nail in the coffin were the Lakers being at the end of their wits, with them being in the 8th seed race all season between them and the Utah Jazz. Kobe Bryant gave everything that he could to win the last 6 of his 7 games before injuring his Achilles to the Golden State Warriors, ending his season and taking away Kobe Bryant's career. And then finally the sweep to the San Antonio Spurs, which quite literally ended this season of hell for the Lakers. This season was the definition of whatever can go wrong will go wrong. Taking out Kobe Bryant, Pau Gasol, and even Dwight Howard to an extent, as he rejected to get well-needed surgery until later, which left him unprepared for the season which he played through. This team had all the makings on paper to bring the Lakers into championship conversations, but all it took was a bunch of unfortunate events to take that away from them and NBA fans everywhere. And once again, even taking away a potential Kobe versus LeBron finals matchup that we was never given. Due to that, I would give the Lakers Big 3 a C ranking. They didn't perform well even when they was all healthy, but with the context, it made so much more sense why. And with Dwight Howard leaving for Houston and Kobe's injury, we never even got to see a repeat of this Big 3. Just a very, very sad story overall, and another example of just how cruel life can be sometimes. And finally, we have another Lakers Big 3, and a Big 3 that I'm sure pisses off a lot of people in the NBA fandom. The Lakers Big 3 of Russell Westbrook, LeBron James, and Anthony Davis. And as we all know, this Lakers Big 3 was formed just last year after the Lakers went out 2-4 against the eventual champions of the Western Conference, the Phoenix Suns, in the first round, only a year after winning it in the bubble. So with LeBron James getting another year older and the opportunity arising, and even possibly some influence from the GM, you have the trade that happened on August 6, 2021, where 5 teams from around the league traded assets to each other. But obviously, the ones that we're focusing on right now is Russell Westbrook being traded for Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, Kyle Kuzma, and Montrezl Harrell. Now, when this trade first happened, there were many skeptics on one hand and believers on the other. The Lakers just won a championship off the defense in depth, but now they're giving it all up for Russell Westbrook. Now, on one side of the argument I heard from the supporters' side is the fact that this trade happens so LeBron James can take a rest in his older age, and the energetic Westbrook can take over the keys, being one of the best ceiling raisers in the NBA as a solo artist we have seen with his time on the OKC Thunder and even with the Washington Wizards. But the NBA waited to see how this team would work together as a unit, and as we all know, it is far beyond our understanding just how bad this season went for the Lakers. First and foremost, we have to talk about the ungodly fit that is Russell Westbrook on the Lakers. In this one season, he recorded one of the worst three-point shooting seasons and overall shooting seasons in his career, and basically had zero role as a starter on this team, and even recorded his worst box plus minus in his career as a player. And even though the rest of the Lakers weren't helping out much in that effort at the same time, with them being a bottom 10 offense and defense that season, LeBron James had to put up a career high at that point of 30 points a game just to compete in games, and the usual 40 games for Anthony Davis due to injuries of him being out equaled up to a 33-49 record for the Lakers. One of the worst LeBron records in his career with a roster that he was aiming for a championship with. And the Lakers and himself debatably gutted their debt for Russell Westbrook to fail miserably in that effort. We don't even need to go into the plethora of viral moments that happened with this Big 3 headlining by Russell Westbrook, but we can all see how bad this trio was going to be just by their first 10 games of the season. And in their second season together, it has gotten so bad that the player whom they traded, 3 players who was integral to their rotation and championship 2 years ago, except Montrezl Harrell, is now headlining the bench unit rather than being a starter. And in that effort, the Lakers are still struggling, but to their credit, at the time of this video, there were only 3 games under 500. However, still the 12th seed, a place back where they were even last year, but at least they're trending upward. But even then, the Lakers traded for Russell Westbrook, who failed miserably after the trade happening, while Kyle Kuzma and KCP continue to give great play to their respective teams. While at one point the players they traded for was in trade talks only a season after being obtained, is now regulated to the bench. I'm sure everyone, or mostly everyone here, well, you can't please everybody on the internet, I just thought about it, will be fine with me putting this Big 3 in the F tier. In my opinion, they were better off running it back and hoping for minimal injuries, but instead they jumped the gun for a player with zero synergy on a team looking to go back in the championship contention. This team did a complete 180 in only 1 year, and I'm sure there won't be any blowback, but I know also that there will be some defenders of this move also. Now, like I said in my last ranking videos, in life, not all things are created equal. In the case of these Big 3s, they are also not created equal in their opportunity to make things happen and their expectations. We've seen Big 3s that had the potential to become potential dynasties in the right circumstances, but broke down for one reason or another. And Big 3s that were doomed to fail due to team management just trying to work in haste and not thinking long term. I'm sure people will disagree with my placements on this video, but as usual, leave your thoughts in the comment section below and let's start a dialogue dialogue on these themes. As the super team and teaming up era continues to become mainstream in the NBA meta, we will see more ambitious big threes come into fruition and either succeed like the Miami Heat big three or fail like the ones we talked about here in this video. But as always, I hope you enjoyed today's video and learned something new, as my vision for this channel is to inform and entertain. Check out my social medias for the instant life of Lavine and other channel news. Check out my Twitch where I stream weekly, my second channel where I post my streams, and lastly, if you want to talk to your boy, there is always my Discord. Links are in the description. With all that out of the way, this is your boy, Lavine Linguini, saying peace.